I need to put the doors on the car so that I can correct the gaps between the different panels. But before I do that, I want the doors to be at least reasonably sound. This is in part because anything that I do to the door might affect the gap. So naturally, before perfecting the gap, we need to get the doors at least solid. They're really not in bad shape. The driver's door required some hammer and dolly to get a fairly substantial and ugly sheet metal problem corrected. And look, I got most of it out, but I'm realistic. What I couldn't get out, I smoothed out with some fiberglass reinforced filler. This door is in better shape in terms of dents, but it's in worse shape in terms of rust. That said, the rust is fairly well concentrated right here. The rest of the door looks pretty good. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time cleaning this up. And then I'd probably like to get some epoxy primer on them. Then we can put them on the car and do the gap work. The doors fit reasonably well. With the doors and the radiator mount in place, I'm ready to slide some fenders on. Kind of a moment of truth to see how everything lines up. I've seen some people complain about the packaging that these fenders get shipped in. This one seems to be just fine.
Well, what do you know? The gaps suck way less than I thought they would. Not too bad. The door's mostly a little bit tight. Up at the top, there's a little bit of a gap that needs to be corrected, and the bottom's a little bit too tight, but I think the door can move just a little bit to fix that. The surprising part is how well these fenders fit in place. Just not bad. It'll take a little bit of correction, but not a lot.
Well, that's encouraging. The panels fit together better than I thought they would. However, I'm a little bit ahead of myself. I realized that putting the panels in place might be premature, and here's why. I haven't squared up the subframe or the rear suspension. I knew it needed to be squared up, but I hadn't quite figured out in my head how important it was to do that before getting all the panels lined up. So I took this string, I tied it to the spindle on the front right wheel, and came back and measured to a point on the left rear wheel. Did the same thing in the other direction, and they really don't quite match. I'm off by a little bit, so I know I need to dial it in. Well, that got me looking at the rear suspension, and it got me a little bit perplexed. You see, there's quite a few adjustments in here. These torsion bars control how far forward the axle is on the car. The panhard bar controls where the axle sits left and right on the car. I could not for the life of me figure out how to control the angle of the pumpkin. The torque arm telescopes at the front. So this doesn't actually control the pivot angle. So what does? The answer? The third member. This component right here ties into the third member as it's bolted into the pumpkin, and as a result, the positioning between this and the pumpkin is affected as you raise or lower the torque arm in this mount point. So that set me back a little bit. Instead of positioning panels and doing gap work, I had to go ahead and order my third member. Well, it's here. So, time to put it in. Okay. Now, the question is this a fool's errand? Yeah, that thing's heavy. Probably should have got some help. There, we're in. Woo! Well, through a creative combination of string and tape measure, I think the car is all squared up. Once I got the third member into the axle, I could then set the pinion angle. And from there, Squaring things up was pretty straightforward using relative points on the chassis and the frame relative to the axle. I changed at that point a little bit the trailing arm dimensions as well as the panhard. I got the axle centered using some measurements, marked then with some little pieces of blue painter's tape. Strings run in different angles, sometimes straight through, sometimes at angles. Once the rear end was squared up, centered in the car, I then measured it from spindle to axle, and I was within 1/32 of an inch. So close that it was hard to know if I were going to make an adjustment, which way I would adjust it. So I felt pretty good about that. Then the only thing was I didn't know for sure if I had a parallelogram. Well, since the rear axle is presumably square to the car, I should be in good shape, but I double-checked that as well by going corner to corner, spindle to a point on the frame, and also to a point on the axle, and everything is within about a 32nd, maybe a 1/16 of an inch. It's time to put everything together and see how it fits. The good news is I have everything covered in some kind of a primer except for this front cowl cover. That one I haven't messed with. Everything else is in pretty good shape. The exercise here is really about panel alignment. It's about gaps. It's about what I'll call final assembly prior to paint. And whether I paint before I put in drivetrain and all these other order of operations things, I don't know yet. But I do know that I need to put it all together in its raw state, primers and whatever coating is on it, so that I can freely make cuts and not have to worry about ruining any finishing. I kind of screwed up. No, that's not accurate. I changed my mind. I think most of the people who run this subframe go without the inner wheel well, the inner wheel fender skirt, whatever we call this thing. And it does allow you to run a wider tire if you do that. However, it also sends all kinds of road debris and junk into the engine compartment when you're using the car as a daily driver. So this isn't a track car. It's not a show car. It's a driver, and I'd kind of like to keep the crap out of the engine compartment. So I changed my mind. I'm putting inner fenders on it. The bad news is the stock inner fenders don't fit on this subframe. The good news is you can make them fit. Now, you can also buy some aftermarket stuff. It ain't cheap. SpeedTech makes something that pushes like $1,000 for a fiberglass inner wheel fender. And if you want to run a wide tire, you probably still need to do something like that. Well, I'm really not planning to push the envelope so far on the front tire. I think a 285 is pretty good, and I think a 285 will fit. If not, a 275 will. I got myself some wheel wells and made a couple of minor cuts to make it work. So if you're interested, here's what it takes to make stock wheel wells work on the Speedway GComp subframe. It takes a cut at the sway bar, and it takes a cut at the back of the A-arm. Those two seem to be enough. Now, I haven't moved the suspension through its full range, but you don't get that much movement in this close to the pivot point. So I think we'll be in good shape. And I suppose worst case scenario, I can take them back out. I really want to put it together with these on so that things fit the way I really expect them to fit when it's all said and done. But it meant I had to take everything apart. And now I guess I get to go put it back together again. Once all those gaps are set, it probably comes back apart. I mean, I guess a guy could paint it, at least in part put together, but the paint will actually be applied mostly in pieces. And I know I've got some body work to do in some other places as well, but I want to get the gaps done first so that we're structurally sound before I start dealing with fine-tuning pieces like, doors and fenders. Now this is where I could really use your help. This gap is about the right size. However, notice from this angle how far out the fender sticks relative to the door. And I don't know how well the video captures it. It's probably, it's about maybe 1/8 or 3/16 further out than the door. Now, part of the problem here is that I don't know the right reference. Is the fender not correct or is the door not correct? I think it's the door, just because the door was pretty messed up. But regardless, I have to find a way to mitigate that problem right there. Do I attempt to reshape the fender? Do I make some attempt to reshape the door? And if so, how? Or do I abandon what I have
and pick up a whole new door shell or maybe just a door skin. Help!